To my tens of dozens of listeners, welcome. Thank you again for tuning in. Today, I'm joined by Jonathan Copeland. Would you mind introducing yourself, sharing a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So my name is Jonathan. I live here in Louisville, Kentucky. I own Clarinets by Copeland, where I specialize in clarinet repair. All the instruments. Big instruments, bass clarinets, all the way to the small ones, the E flats. And then I also specialize in refurbished clarinets that I sell. And I'm also newly a Royal clarinet dealer now. So
Okay.
kind of my main concentration is clarinet, but yeah, I have a bachelor's and master's in clarinet performance from Middle Tennessee State University with Dr. Waldecker there. That's basically the intro of who I am. I mean, I'm a clarinet guy. Like I focus on clarinet repair, clarinet sales, and then obviously just instruction here and there as far as I'm doing some master classes now with repair. But yeah, in general, that's in a nutshell.
Cool. So what got you started in clarinet? Were you my experience was kind of, I was an elementary school band kid, and it kind of ended up following me into adulthood. Is that about the same track, school band, that kind of experience?
Yeah, I would say, so basically everybody in my family, I think, except for my mom, played a musical instrument, and they all played clarinet except for my sister. She was an oboist, fantastic oboe player too, but she ended up going into physical therapy and chose a different route. Maybe good for bad, I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll leave that to the listeners in the music world. But yeah, for me, I grew up around clarinet, because my dad he played ear, like he wasn't classically trained, and then my brother, both of my brothers played, and so yeah, literally when band came around, it wasn't even like a thought in my mind, like I was going to play clarinet. We had one, and it was an old plastic Bundy in horrible shape, but yeah, that's what I started on, and so I started in sixth grade. Yeah, and then the rest is history. I would say I was more into sports back. I wanted to play like football, but I actually playing backyard football, I ended up breaking my knee. I tore my ACL,
Ooh.
and so that was actually a big change for me. I really was kind of focused on like sports. Like I wanted to do some sort of sports, I thought, at least with my young mind. But then once I broke my knee, like that really made me start practicing, because I couldn't do anything else for a while.
Right.
That was right where I really grew to love playing the clarinet. Yeah.
Nice. Now, with all the refurbishing and tech work you do, did that start early on too? Did you have some young curiosity about how the instrument worked? Anything like that?
Not really. My dad, like, speaking of that old Bundy again, my dad actually, I remember him repatting it with a butter knife on the kitchen table. And to my knowledge, it worked. So, I had no clue, back then. But no, as far as repair, my dad, always fixed stuff. Like, he was always fixing things. And I kind of just grew up around that, fixing cars. He was a cabinet maker, still is.
Mm.
And so just always kind of working, I guess, maybe with my hands a lot, like with him. And so, but yeah, repair actually didn't start until, between my undergrad and grad work. I started an apprenticeship with a company called Onks Woodwind Specialist in near Nashville, Tennessee.
Okay.
He's an oboe specialist. And so, yeah, I actually trained with an oboe specialist, and then eventually became their clarinet repair guy, their specialist for clarinet. But yeah, for as far as repair, really, like, even when I was in college, like my undergrad, I actually used to fix Xboxes. Like I would take them apart, and like, try to figure out all the insides of them.
Right.
And so I was always working with my hands. And so when repair came around, Jason, who's the owner at Onks Woodwind, he was looking for an apprentice. And it was, I went to it thinking, hey, I just need maybe a summer job. And then I ended up staying for, almost 10 years before I moved here to Louisville.
Wow.
I did my own thing, but yeah, that's kind of how I fell into repair. It was more of a necessity. I think like a life, choices, in between undergrad and grad, trying to wrestle with, hey, do I want to be a player, or do I want to teach, or, and then repair came up, and, I don't think I ever would have thought I would have been where I'm at now, but I'm thankful for sure that I'm here. So
Yeah. Well, there's a common thread, I feel like, with a lot of my guests as far as how they've chosen to shape their adult life and career.
yeah.
And I think that it takes a certain amount of openness to to who you are and what the opportunities are like in front of you. So, but
Yeah.
it's cool to hear. Who knows, for everyone listening, who knows what a good opportunity can turn into.
Yeah. Oh,
But
absolutely.
it's great. For you, it seems to have turned into a great business of its own. So that's cool. Let's see. Now you mentioned your professor, your university professor. Who can you go back and cover who all you've studied with over the years for as far as clarinet performance?
Yeah. So, I mean, my main two teachers, obviously were, my main one in college was Dr. Todd Waldecker at Middle Tennessee State. So there, I did my bachelor's in performance, and then, clarinet performance, and my master's degree. I did both of them with him.
Mm-hmm.
But if you go before that, Roanne Romines in Maryville, Tennessee, she has a great, private studio there, and near UT Knoxville there. Her and her husband Jay, like he's a saxophonist, does saxophone lessons, and I think he used to teach at UT too. But yeah, so Roanne Romines, like she was my high school, and I started when I mentioned I broke my knee. I actually started taking lessons like shortly after that, my freshman year, because I remember really having a passion for like performing kind of birthed in me during that time, because everybody was doing like the marching band, and obviously I couldn't do it. So I was just practicing all the time. And, I was kind of thankful I didn't have to participate in marching band, to be honest, that year. And so, yeah, I mean, so I remember going to lessons, during that whole time when, the marching band season, my freshman year school. So that was really when I started actually taking lessons. I didn't have any lessons, before my freshman year in high school. And then other than that, the only other people that have really, like, I guess, influenced me a lot would be like Robert Spring. Like I've always like looked up to him, but the only like experience I've had actually like with teaching with him is I put in right at the end of my undergrad that he always puts on the Belgium Clarinet Academy, and so yeah, in Belgium. So my wife and I, she's a clarinet player too. So we both actually went to that Belgium Clarinet Academy, I think around 2008, 2007, somewhere around in there. And so, yeah, so we were there for that week, and that was huge for me, just like really, because I was still wrestling with if I wanted to do, clarinet, for a career, like, because, you're still in college, you can still kind of make that decision.
Right.
And I remember going to that was huge for me to kind of solidify, like, yes, I do want to stick with clarinet, as long as I'm in it and the Lord would have me in it. That's what I wanted to do. So, yeah.
Nice. Yeah. Some of those big events can be real formative experiences for young professionals. Yeah, I've had a similar experience with different teachers. Cal Opperman put on these clarinet intensives years ago, and that had a big deal with the kind of the track of my professional life. But yeah, I mean, it's great to be able to rub elbows with people in the professional world and see it. I was hoping, I mean, this whole COVID thing really threw a monkey wrench in a lot of people's plans. I'd talked to people about the clarinet fests or the different events like that, because those are great for up and coming professionals, and trying to just talking with other people. And this is part of the purpose of this show. Even it's like, well, if we can't be in person right now for the most part, like let's get some information and feedback from people about how they've created their careers. This is kind of important to build. But cool. So from the performance world, what are some what are some big core lessons you feel you like some formative ideas about the clarinet that you've come away with that maybe have shaped how you approach your instrument work now?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean the biggest thing is just, for me is just, diligence. Like I remember Dr. Waldecker. I felt like I had some natural talent when I was coming into the program, and I remember just having a rude awakening. Because when you're in high school, it's all about like all state and all state East and
Right.
all this competition there, and then all of a sudden you're thrown into college, and I think there's a good period of time where you kind of have that rude awakening type where you're like, wow, I'm not as awesome as I thought, that type of deal. And so, yeah, I remember, Waldecker, just talking about how, talent is only going to take you, so far. So talent and will take you so far. And then, hard work and discipline and actually showing up into the practice room. And so I think that's really helped me as far as like with repair, and really not just coming to this place where sorry, there's somebody outside honking the horn. So I mean for me, like just coming up, and when I'm coming to the bench and I'm actually working, like I'm not like making excuses for like, hey, this is good enough, or like I'm always kind of driving myself to reach that next level. So
Yeah.
And like always, being open, I think to learning, I think is the biggest thing. Like, especially if you have young students listening, being teachable, like that's huge. Like, I mean, because if you're not teachable, you're not gonna learn. And so you really learn teachability through humility and just realizing like, hey, I am always growing, and everyone that you interact with is growing as well. Like, and they're all in a different stage in their journey. And so, I mean, just recognizing that, I think will help you kind of just be a teachable person. So I think that's what really helped me with repair, because I struggled with that at the beginning. Like I remember thinking like, hey, like I would take it to Jason, like for him to double check my repair work. And I remember wrestling with that because he would be like, this is off. And I felt like it was like perfect. And I'm like, like this is perfect. Like, what are you talking about? And I really knew that. I mean, it was like a 3-year process where like I had to go through that and just wrestle with that and really kind of, it just honed my craft as far as repair for sure. But that I think really it kind of stemmed from, what, Dr. Waldecker, taught us as far as, natural talent only will take you so far. It really takes, diligence and, persistent showing up, to whatever craft you're doing. So.
That's great. Let's see. Now, I discovered you from, like kind of the refurbishing world. I think I may have sent a student or two to you over the years. It's been kind of spread out, but
Sure.
What are some things like in your shop? What are some things that you feel like you need to do just kind of the old fashioned, tried and true way? I'm sure there's plenty of innovation in the instrument tech world.
Yeah.
But what are some things that's like it's got to be kind of the classic old school way for you?
Yeah, I mean, really, it just kind of comes down to, I think, like just good pad work. I mean, I mean, there's so much to that, like question in general, as far as like for repair, like because you always have to have like solid key work. Things have to be tight. I'm like I was working on an overhaul right before we jumped on here, and that's what I'm doing before I pad work. So I'm actually like key fitting and that type of stuff. But I think especially like if you look at a lot of the like manufacturer, like any of them, like I'm not any of them under the bus, so I'm including all manufacturers. I think one of the big things is they tend to focus on like innovation, and that next new line of clarinet that's going to compete with the market. And I understand that part, from a business perspective. But I think if you're coming down to like just like the old school, like kind of what needs to happen, it really comes down to just good pad work, like because I feel like if you can design this amazing instrument and then you get to the pad work part and you just kind of throw the pads on there, which I feel like happens a lot of the times, what you end up with is an instrument that's like halfway functioning. Like it's like really putting Well, I mean, it's just bad pad work on a really good instrument. So especially like, like a Buffet R13, like I feel like when those come from the factory, like they need work, and like Buffet is not the only one, like all of them are there. And so, yeah, I mean, that's just one of those things like where it's just for the repair side, it would be the pad work. And then from a playability side, I would just say it really takes being like a clarinet player, to really know how an instrument should feel. And I don't think that's always happening, of course, with new instruments. But yeah, when I would just say, like, when it comes to repair, I think pad work is often like overlooked. Like it's like, hey, like we've done all this work to make these new little inserts for the ends of the pivot screws, or and like machining all this different stuff.
Yeah.
And like pad work is kind of just like, oh, that's easy, but then like it really is a craft and an art to really making an instrument feel fantastic.
Yeah.
Just how it feels, even not even just how it responds, but how it feels, like how squishy the pads are, or how firm, and yeah, I mean, that all makes a difference. So to me, I really just come down to that. Like, I guess you could call that old school, but I mean, that really is just you just really have to coming back to the diligence thing, like just not lying to yourself when you're checking instruments and making sure that they're sealing the way they need to. And I just feel like that's often overlooked, in the repair world and, in the manufacturing world. So,
yeah. Well, I've noticed that concern, talking to a lot of other players. Like, it's true. If you just get something straight from the factory, you basically have to go right to your tech. It's you can't hardly play an instrument right out of the box.
Yeah.
So as far as pad work goes, like, do you have some preference in the types of pads you use? Is there a mix? What's kind of the direction you take for that?
Yeah. So I do leave it to, like, like I'll tell you my preference, but I do like leave it up to as well the player. Although if they don't know, I'll direct them into what I think is best. But if somebody's coming to me like, I really love leather pads, then I can work with that if I can't talk them into what I really like. Right. Leave it at that. But yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, I have actually on my website, betterclarinets.com, I actually have a blog post about different pad choices, so your listeners could go, find that, check it out. But in general, so in the shop, especially like on my instruments that I refurbish, unless somebody like requests, like I use what's called a Master Series pad. It's made, J.L. Smith makes the pads, but it's a Valentino product, and so I think they actually own Valentino, but it's not like your traditional Valentino with the thin layer of the like the greenback Valentino pads. These are more like their Pro line. They have like a thicker backing, kind of like multiple layers on there, and then it actually has this sealing layer on the pad itself. And so those are really firm. And some repair techs don't like them, and then some do. I like them because well, let me say why some people don't. Some people don't because they think they warp. But what I've just found is that it's actually the way they're installing the pads that's what's causing the warping. Like just a pad in general, it's a synthetic material. It's not gonna warp on you. But when you install it and you use too much heat, like if you were just using the same amount as if you were putting on a skin pad, that's going to cause those pads to warp. But I have a technique that I use that, I'm using minimal heat as far as when I'm actually installing it, and sticking it up into the pad cup, which keeps it, nice and flat. So those are my favorite. But then, yeah, I do use Cork Pads. Like I really like Cork Pads a lot too, like professional setups on the upper joint, because you can bevel, it's like, where they're more angled on instead of just like a real rough edge. And helps like with some like your side B flat, G sharp, your pinky G sharp. So a lot of those notes will get like this kind of hissy, kind of fuzzy, sound in them. And so when you're able to bevel that pad and obviously have the right key opening, what happens when a pad is just nice and square like that the air is coming out, and when it comes out, it hits, and then it kind of like shoots out like that way, and then obviously it's coming around. But when it's actually beveled, it hits, and then it kind of wraps around, like it just gives some like airflow to that.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I do that a lot with like bevel pads, like especially on A clarinets a lot, you'll get like some fuzzy notes, more so on an A clarinet. And so that really helps, like especially, to put a cork pad, in certain places. But in general, I'll put them, if I'm putting cork pads, I'll put them on the whole upper joint, except for the AD key. And then the rest of them I'll do masters. And then, but yeah, if somebody wants like leather, leather pads, I like Rue pads from Music Medic. Those are really flat. They don't stick as bad. They do advertise they don't stick, but they will stick if you get like oil or, some kind of grease from your hands on them.
Yeah.
But in general, they're better than most leather pads as far as sticking. So, but yeah, those are kind of my go-tos. I'll use skin pads if I have to. I've really kind of moved away from the skin pad world. I don't know. To me, you get a lot more pad noise, because you're dealing with materials, that are all like wrapped around, and so that skin will come loose eventually, and once it does that, like you're going to get a lot of pad noise and leaks, too. So
this is fascinating to me to hear, because I've seen, I've been through a number of different techs over the years for my own instrument work, and sometimes I'll see stuff like that, like, oh, I don't know why, it just feels or sounds better,
Yeah.
But that's interesting. I would never have thought that the what's like the aerodynamics of the pad would have something to do with the sound and response and all that. But that, not having heard it makes sense.
It
air
really
coming
does.
out of your.
I mean, it goes from like where like some notes are just like super fuzzy. Like I always bevel the register pad for that reason, because your long B will get some kind of, depending on how well you have the pad seated, like you'll some kind of pad noise, because I mean obviously all the pads are closed at that point, but yeah, having that register pad beveled, it really helps the air kind of come around it, and it's the same thing as, I don't know if you saw people where they've installed like needles to try to like in the cork pad on the register, and it actually goes into the register tube, and it kind of helps. It just helps disperse the air, and it closes the size of the hole just slightly too. Having that needle stuck in there. So it's the same type of concept, but like coming back like to new instruments, like they'll have that register pad. It'll be cork. Say like on our R13, but it's just nice and square, and a lot of times the tension's so heavy, it's created like a deep indention into the pad. And so like that's another thing, with cork pads, you can resurface that out. And then because what happens when the air's coming, you'll get a lot of noise in the sound, because when the air is coming out, and it get trapped into that indention in the pad. So you want to have flat pads as much as possible, and then I think the bevel just kind of helps it, because it hits and then wraps around instead of just kind of hitting the deflecting out. Yeah. And it makes a huge difference. Like, I just set up a new R13 yesterday, and did the same thing. I beveled the pad, and it made that long beam just much more clear, from the get-go. So yeah, I mean, it's a huge benefit for the cork. And then but if the master pads are, they are, I don't know, they're just they resonate very well. Like, so for me, like it's kind of similar to a cork pad. Like cork pad, obviously those are two different materials, but in general, master pads, cork pads work really, really well together. Like, masters on the lower, cork on the upper. So yeah.
Nice. I'm curious. So your apprenticeship was with an oboe shop, right?
Yeah.
Are there any of these ideas or principles that are like kind of more universal to working on all woodwinds, like things like pad shape or dealing with the open holes, and what are some things that might be like kind of more specific to clarinet, like you might do it one way on somebody's flute or oboe, but for clarinet it has to be a certain way. Do you understand what I'm getting at?
Yeah. As far as like oboe repair and like versus clarinet repair,
like for instance, like what you were just talking about with shaping a cork pad, would that be at all similar to anything on an oboe?
You can. Now I would say, like, like especially with the shop I worked at, like we didn't do that like all the time. Like, obviously if somebody requested, we could do that, to bevel the pad. But in general, we didn't, do that as much, at least at the shop that I worked at, with the oboe repair. But no, like for me, like I just noticed, I mean, obviously I'm a clarinet player, you would not want to hear me play oboe. I can make sound out of an oboe, but I can't fix them. But no, I mean, as far as like the differences, like, yeah, I mean, you wouldn't always put, like the bevel, on a cork pad on an oboe, but saying that, like there were instances, I remember even some pro would come in and they'd be like, hey, this note is just kind of like fuzzy and kind of covered. And we would try to like do that technique to kind of try to help that. And then a lot of times though with oboes, the difference, like you have some of the open hole keys, instead of like we just have like the chimneys with the rings. It closes that pad. Well, they actually have holes in their pad. So like a lot of times you could have the pad in there, but then the pad itself is not sealed to the pad cup because it needs the seal as well. So that's an issue. And then another difference, like, for oboe, like the lower joint pads, for a pro oboe, at least, you're in general, and they're obviously in the oboe world, there are differences, but you're using cork pads like all the way down. So like your right hand, like stack pads on an oboe, those are going to be cork. And then like, professional, like Luray oboes, like you're going to have like your C pad and then your B and your B flat. I think like both of those all of those are cork on an oboe. Whereas a clarinet, if you put all cork pads and huge cork pads down there, I mean, it's going to be super, super loud. And it's just a little bit different though, like with the way an oboe, like the way the keys close and then like how big they actually are. Cause they're actually not as big as a clarinet key cup, at least on most oboes. And so, yeah, so that is a big difference. Like clarinets have usually like, we'll have like a cork pad set up on the upper and then, either a skin pad or, leather pad or master pads on the lower. Oboes, a professional oboe setup would have cork pads, all the way down. And so that's a huge difference. And I mean, it's pretty critical too, as far as just like response with an oboe is, well, but I know there are some makers that are adamant about having like a mixture of skin and cork through the whole instrument on an oboe. So there are different, techniques and different ways of looking at it, from both, sides of it. I would say that it's the same with clarinet. Like I don't know how well that answers your question, but yeah, as far as general though, I mean, repair wise, I mean, you have to have the keys, fit, and so that's the same, for both. And you need, I mean, everything needs to operate, freely and smoothly, and I would say in general, oboes have a little bit lighter key work, lighter tension, and clarinets will have a little bit heavier tension, not super heavy. I mean, but it's just you're dealing with shorter keys on oboes, so everything feels a little bit lighter.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, and then the only other thing is we have the register tube where they actually have octave vents that you actually have to remove and clean periodically. So because they're always getting water in their octave keys, and so you have to remove those out. Whereas clarinet players, like there's really nothing we need to remove. And then the other big thing, the difference like just between like oboe and clarinet repair would be adjustment screws. Like really the only one we had was on your throat A. I know there's new models now that have them like in other places, but in general, I mean, like a clarinet like has like a single key, it opens or closes, or you press it closed, and it's just very simple. Oboes are different. I mean, it's kind of like a bass clarinet, like if you think of it that way, like where you have like on your right hand, like two pads, and they have to work together. So each pad has to be individually closing perfectly, and then you actually have to put them together where they're both closing simultaneously at the same time. So yeah, that would be the biggest, like for clarinet repair, and that's why I feel like really studying and training with an oboe specialist was super helpful for me, because setting up an oboe and then coming to a clarinet, like clarinet, I mean, obviously it was like night and day difference, like as far as how easy comparatively trying to do a single key versus trying to put two together.
Yeah.
Totally different. So And that was why, I think, working on oboes really helped me become a better bass clarinet repair guy,
Hmm.
because it's a similar type of, mechanism. I mean, obviously it's bigger scale, but yeah, that definitely helped me as far as how to think through like, hey, these need to work together and that type of stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah. Nice. Um, I wanted to ask now about refurbishing older instruments. I know I've personally I haven't owned, but I've gotten to play some stuff from the 80s, the 70s, earlier. My E flat clarinet's actually from like I think 1913 or something. It was a weird eBay find, and my my tech was pretty upset that I handed it to him because there's just so much wrong with it. But at the same time, there's a unique sound quality that just I was enamored with, and I decided to kind of eat the cost of like bringing it up to spec so I can play it in a modern context. But um, what are let's see, what are some things that you like about older instruments, and maybe if possible, like are there any kind of general issues that you have to deal with when anything that old comes through your shop?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean the biggest thing is, especially when you're getting to 1913, I could see that would be a challenge. And the biggest thing is going to be, key fitting, like you're especially if the instrument has been played a lot, like you're going to have a lot of just loose keys, and a lot of times, that's overlooked. Like, people, repair techs might tighten them a little bit and then just kind of move on and put new pads. But it really matters that key work is, as tight as it can be, at least. And so that's probably like the number one thing that I've noticed, especially refurbishing. I've refurbished, I have a guy I work for, that it's like a Selmer collector, and he, I mean, he sends me some really old stuff. Like there was one from like 1897, or it was really, really old. And I mean, it was just awful. Look, I mean, the key, I mean, if you looked at it, you're like, why? Like, why would you do this? And I mean, but it looked fantastic when I was done. I mean, I key fit all the keys, everything was fit. And then obviously that went to, had sat in like an attic. So a lot of times you'll see that a lot with older instruments. And then the wood is just really, really dry. And then oddly enough, like when it's like that, especially because, it's not being played, and the changes that happens when you play an instrument,
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times like instruments like that don't have cracks, unless it already had one, which I've just found that to be super odd. But yeah, what I'll just, fit all the keys, and then I'll oil the wood, and that can be a longer process, if it's really, really dry. But yeah, but then from that point on, I mean, it's just a standard repair, at that point of just, putting the pads on. But I will say some of the older instruments, like, I'm just thinking of Selmer because, I've worked on so many old Selmers. A lot of times, when they're more like, handmade instead of like CNC type, work that's done now, some of the just like the craftsmanship is amazing. Obviously that they're able to do that, like, basically handmade, on just a regular, lathe like I have. And so, but the problem is like, a lot of like the key work and stuff, that the angles are not quite as precise. Like sometimes they'll be too shallow, and then sometimes they'll be kind of too, like where the pads are like going to have to be way too thick. So you're kind of like having to bend key work and to get things nice and level. And then the problem with that is like when an instrument's old, a lot of times, like the brazing points on them are a little bit weak. So if you're trying to bend a key, it could break, and then you have to re-braze it and fix it. Mm-hmm. So those are types of things that, are kind of special to I guess older instruments. Whereas like say like Buffet R13s, they come in for the most part, the key angles are going to be pretty similar. Now Yamaha, I would say they're one of the ones that have some of the most amazing machining, I would say, as far as like their key work's a little bit softer, but like their angles and everything are just spot on. I mean, I don't really know why that is, but that's just something I've observed, in the oboes and clarinets. But yeah, so that's one of those things, like when you have angles that are all messed up, that really does affect, you get the key fit correctly. You have to get that angle correct too, because if you just put a real thick pad in there because the angle's messed up,
Yeah.
then it's going to sound not very good. I mean, you could probably try to open it up, and then and you're going to run into issues because with older instruments, like the clearances are a lot smaller, and so yeah, if you put something super thick, like say on your low, like FCEB on a clarinet, it's probably not going to open enough to vent for your G, so it's going to be really fuzzy. And so a lot of times, even with fixing the key angles, I've actually to file like the foot on the C key. I've actually had to file it in a way to where that key would just open up more.
Oh, wow.
And that way that your G would be more resonant. And so I do that a lot on older instruments because the tolerances are just so, they're so small, I guess I'm trying to say.
Yeah. I wanted to ask too, so you mentioned re-oiling, especially if something's really dried out. But I don't know if everyone feels the same about it, but I've always heard kind of a negative connotation about oiling, especially the bore of a clarinet. I always felt that there was more information behind that than people try to oversimplify whatever the problem might be. Would you do you have a minute to kind of explain oiling a clarinet in general and like maybe figure out what people's problem might be with it?
Yeah. Well, for me, like I would rate, like especially if there's a young player, listening to this, like as far as like oiling, you do have to be careful because if you have skin pads or leather pads, really any pad. I mean, cork pad would be a little bit different, but yeah, skin pads or leather pads, you could actually ruin your pads if you didn't really know what you were doing as far as like applying the oil. So that would be the first thing I would just kind of mention, about that. But yeah, as far as oiling itself, I mean, like for me, like I do recommend it. I mean, because in just years and years of doing it, but I kind of liken it to like a piece of like antique furniture, that you're going to you're kind of the surface of that wood, you're just kind of, reconditioning as far as, and kind of preserving. And the reason why, I mean, there are different oils that penetrate differently. Like I don't really know all that, like the science behind it, but like different oils do. And I have like a blend that I use that kind of has like an orange scent to it. It's made by Valentino. So I use that. And then there's another one that's Naylor's War Oil. So that's a good one as well that I've used. And both of those penetrate pretty well. But I mean, they have done studies where they've put like a piece of, Granadillo wood, and soaked it in wood for like 6 months, like a really long time. And then they pull it out and they actually, cut into it, and it didn't penetrate, like you would think it would just be like soaked, completely,
right.
Waterlogged, but it wasn't, it did penetrate, but it just didn't, it didn't penetrate all the way, through. And so obviously there are different repair techs will have different, I guess, advice on that. Like some would say, well, you just, that may have been a different oil, or, like you could use a different oil that would penetrate more. But for me, like I'm thinking like, where you're seeing cracks for the most part are going to be on the surface, and cracks and instruments really come from, I believe, like, and I just had a talk at Michigan with their clarinet students there. And I was teaching them that like where an instrument cracks on a clarinet, like a wooden clarinet, is usually in the upper joint, and it's usually in that top upper region of the instrument, right? And so my theory on that is that, that's where the warm air, when we're blowing into it, and the moisture and all that is reaching first. Like when a clarinet is cold to the touch and it's, really cold, a lot of times band directors will be like, hey, just blow warm air into your instrument, keep it warm. And that's actually the exact opposite of what you want to do, because what happens is when you blow that warm air into it, the wood is beginning to expand inside that bore, because that column is just nice and, warm in there after a while. And so your outside of your instrument is still kind of cold and kind of brittle feeling. And so when that wood begins to expand inside, that's what'll pop cracks on the outside. So the biggest thing, with cracking, as far as trying to connect that to oiling or something, I think it's more to do with one, humidity, but then also just that those extreme changes of going from cold to hot. And I mean, I shouldn't say extreme maybe, because it can even happen. I remember the MTSU, a choral room that we always had recitals in, and it was always so cold in there, and then sometimes it'd be super hot, but it was always just off in there. So anytime you were in there performing, and then you came out and say you went into like the band room that was normal temperature, we always were seeing cracks and stuff there, that were coming into our shop even, and I really do think, even just going from one room that's cold to one that's hot, and then you start blowing warm air into it, it's really dangerous as far as, crack for clarinet. But yeah, back to oiling. I mean, yeah, I just see I recommend annual maintenance. And so during that time, if I feel like the instrument needs it, I'll oil the bore and then actually oil the outside. And then what I do is I'll let it sit, and then I'll usually let it sit overnight if we're doing an oiling. And then I can tell, especially some of these older horns that I've done, when they're really, really dry, it'll just soak up all the oil where there's no excess at all. And then I'll oil it again. And then I'll just keep doing that until, that's why I said earlier that the older ones can take a little bit longer, because sometimes it takes several days before it stops receiving the oil. And then at that point, that's when I'll wipe it off. And you can tell a drastic difference. I'll have this light brown color when it's dry, and then it's like this real nice kind of dark, brown, kind of black color, and then at that point I wipe it off, and then I actually seal it with some wax on the outside and kind of rag it into it, and that just really helps kind of seal it. It's nice and got oiled and all that, and I really do believe that kind of helps it, and then also that you have the grains and the different things, especially on oboes, especially with the bore being so small. We always would find actually the leaking, it would actually be leaking just straight through the wood. There wouldn't be a crack, but there would literally just be leaking through the post hole, and that even clarinet. And so so I feel like oiling kind of helps that some too, because it does kind of, obviously it's clogging some of the pores and different things, and so in general, I am a advocate for oiling your clarinet. Now I don't get into it, I'm not very strict on it, I guess I should say. If somebody's hey, I only want to do it once a year, I'm not going to be oh, well, you need to do it every 6 months. I don't really do that. I do recommend while it's in the shop, and we're doing a cleaning, we should oil it at that time at least, and if not more, if they feel like it. And different regions of the country are going to be different, as far as how much they need to oil it and that type of stuff. As far as community level, but in general, I'm an advocate for oiling. But I don't know if you had any more follow-up questions in mind about that, as far as pushback against it. But
well, I think that pretty well answers my question, because I think a lot of people's complaints, if I really look back, it's because they just didn't know what they were doing, and oil inside of the clarinet without and then without any regard to the pads or the outside. I figure I'm open to whatever makes my clarinet work longer and better. So I
You're
feel
not hurting it. I would say you're not hurting it by oiling, but you could hurt it if you get it on the pads. So that's why it's good to do the oiling when all the keys are off. So that's really the best time to do it.
Yeah. So leave it to a tech.
That kind of is that is kind of what I recommend is annual maintenance for bringing your clarinet in, and having not only the wood oiled but the keys oiled and cleaned, and kind of getting all that abrasive dirt out of the hinge tubes and stuff. It really does make a difference.
So here's something. What I assume you work with a mix of professionals and just whoever whoever comes by with business, but is there something that you see in your shop that you feel like with a little more attention on the player's side that you wouldn't have to deal with as often? Common repair issues that if somebody like, I don't know if they swab more, if they were less careless with something. You
Yeah.
know what I'm?
Oh yeah. I would say the biggest thing is assembly. Like we kind of just can get careless sometimes with how we assemble, and usually we'll go for the places where we can kind of get the most leverage. Like we'll grab over like the FC key cluster there down on the lower joint, and I've seen
Yeah.
professional and students, and they're just kind of like squeezing
Right.
it together. I mean, honestly, like if I could show them in the shop like how much little pressure it takes to put on that C key to totally knock out your EBFC, I
Yeah.
think that they would probably not use that anymore. And so, like, I have it, if I had a clarinet neck, I could show you, but like, basically the biggest thing takeaway for that is just not to grab over keys, like, and to be squeezing like on the wood as much as you can.
Yeah.
And always like on the upper joint, like where you can kind of grab a little bit where those keys where you're naturally going to kind of squeeze a little bit. And so that really helps kind of preserve that adjustment there. And then the other thing I would just say is really that maintenance, like that annual maintenance. Like I know it sounds like that's just something you want to have, like just so the repair tech can have work, but it really does make a huge difference as far as like how noisy the instrument is, like, and especially for students like that are struggling, and then they'll be like, I don't, they think it's them, and in some cases it is, they're learning and embouchure and different things.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of times, like, just the happy faces that I've seen, from students, like when they get their instrument and they're like, hey, it doesn't squeak here anymore, and it's like, well,
Right.
yeah, I mean, it's covering now, and so having that annual maintenance, for one too, like especially for like college players that are like having these big auditions for schools, or they're starting to look at doing auditions for symphonies, or whatever. Usually those repair emergencies usually happen right before those things for whatever reason, and it's because you're out, and a lot of times it's been there all along. You're just starting to notice it more because you're just more kind of anxious about what you're about to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so but obviously there's general emergencies too, but in general, like those are drastically reduced, like by just having an annual maintenance schedule where your instrument, I mean, in my shop, it comes completely apart, and then obviously so I can oil wood instruments. Everything is clean, detailed, cleaned, and then everything's put back together and oiled, fresh. And then every key, every pad, every chord is checked individually. I'm putting it back together to make sure everything is working, and then everything put together as far as spring tensions and all that type of stuff. But yeah, if you're doing that like once a year to an instrument, like, I mean, you're rarely going to have like an emergency pop up. Obviously there will be, but you're drastically reducing that. And our natural tendency as clarinet players, if you have students, like, our natural tendency when something's not working is to squeeze harder. And so a lot of times we're overworking, when we could have an instrument that's, where we can actually start working on our technique more, about having line retention and faster fingers that way, because, when an instrument's not working and you're gripping, like, you're not gonna be able to play, very fast, efficiently. So that's another reason to have, I think people kind of overlook that too, like that aspect of it. And I think that would probably be the biggest thing I would say for clarinet players to do. It's just to kind of get into that rhythm. Like, same thing as your car, you're taking in every 3 months for your oil change.
Change, yeah.
Think about once a year, have your clarinet oil changed.
Right.
So.
Yeah, that's great. And you're right. I remember just the realization of having to have regular maintenance, like it changes your perspective on things. And it's why I think it's wise for people to understand the necessity and then start budgeting their time and money for it. And
it lowers the cost too, because like if the longer you go, like the bigger overhaul job it's going to be. So that's that's a good point. So
we're quickly running out of time. This has been pretty fascinating for me, and I'm sure for the audience. Let me let's get back to the music performance side here. What's some rep that you really enjoy, like either to listen to or if you get the chance to perform, like what's some rep that really moves you?
the biggest thing, like I've always enjoyed playing them and listening, and the Weber concertos. Those were always my favorite. Of course, like the Premier Rhapsody. That was always a big one for me. But and then yeah, I mean, for the most part, honestly, like as most people that follow me know I'm a Christian. So a lot of the time when I'm listening to stuff, I'm listening to Christian music actually nowadays. But as far as like rep, I mean, I actually don't listen to a ton of clarinet music anymore. And I have a whole other story that I could tell why that is. But in general, for me, I mean, that mainly the pieces that I've played a lot, so like I think like the Weber, there's the Debussy, there was the Fantasia, I think Introduction to Fantasia, I can't remember the name, but by Bossi,
Okay.
that one, and then man, yeah, so many that I've played throughout the year, like the Copeland Concerto, obviously, I love that one. I listen to that one. I do actually listen to that one quite a bit. But yeah, in general, I mean, I'm kind of all over like the big pieces, in the clarinet world. I kind of, I listen to a lot of that, and then kind of cool too. Like I do get like, players that are coming in, they'll give me their CDs. So like the U of L guy, I just met him, and so he gave me some of his CDs and some solo work and chamber work stuff. So I get to listen to some of that stuff too. But yeah, in general,
it must be satisfying to hear music produced from instruments that have received your attention.
Yeah, and it's funny because you can like even hear like key clicks and stuff in like other recordings, and I'm like, oh, you need your instrument service.
There you go. Yeah, man, that's another thing. Like, I the matter of who's listening and what they're listening to. Like, I can't bear to listen to some of my past recordings just from school or whatever. But some other people think it sounds great. But I'm always hearing the stuff that I'm the most embarrassed about.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine.
One squeak, everything else is like spot on. I mean, a lot of times, and you got that one squeak, you're like, oh.
Yeah, and if the recording is good enough, like to hear the instrument and like extra noise that could have been avoided. I can't imagine that. Now I'm going to be listening for that when I when I listen for stuff.
Yeah, we had at MTSU, we had a like our recital hall always had this like water pump underneath the stage that would like kick on, and so like I remember it was like a real soft, like I did this decrescendo all the way down, and then it was like, yeah, it just came on. I was like, dang it.
Well, that's how you know where you're playing, I guess, right? The identification marker. Now, I know you've worked on probably all kinds of different makes and models of clarinet. Is there a preference that you might recommend, like or that you enjoy, or maybe something that you've seen like the least major problems with?
Yeah. I mean, all of them are going to have their general like maintenance, type things that they need. I mean, all the materials will break down eventually, but no, I mean the like Buffet, they really do have a great product. Now there are like different issues, like manufacturing type things that I could say, but like I feel like in general, like once you kind of get a Buffet, like they're generally, like I would say, just from my perspective, it's a repair part, like they're pretty easy to set up as well. But Yamaha, like they're pretty similar. Their keywork's a little bit softer. Selmer has like really heavy duty kind of keywork, like that. I just kind of think they're like just like, I don't know, like thick walled bore, like heavy keywork, and those, like, especially some of the newer stuff, like they're pretty solid as well. I mean, really, like it's getting to that point where like, every maker, like, they're using CNC, computerized equipment now when they're making them. So everything can be pretty accurate as far as, the making of the instrument. I would say, I don't know if it's just because my familiarity with them, but like Buffet, like especially like the R13s, and above, are just fairly straightforward as far as like, I just know like how much glue I need to put into a pad cup, and different things. Like obviously sometimes it's a little different, but you can kind of, jump through those, fairly fast, as far as, setting those up. And then another one that's really impressed me, that's why I've actually become a dealer for them, is the Royal clarinets, Royal Global. Those are fantastic. Like even their lowest model, their Genesis model, it's $1,300 or $1,350, I think. Double silver plated keys, all wood, tuned to 440. Versus like an E11 that would be like 442.
Right.
But I mean, they look fantastic. I mean, it looks like a BAM case that it comes in, and 1350. And then of course they have all their other higher end stuff, but they are really machined and made, very well. They actually come with the Valentino pads I was mentioned before. And yeah, I mean, I have several of those that I've tried that were sent to me before I became a dealer. And I mean, they were all very solid, like as far as how they were made. So I feel like that's going to be an up and coming kind of brand as far as like the clarinet world. But they right now they're at just a really good price point too, because they're trying to get into that market. So in general though, I mean, obviously I would stay away from like the $99 eBay clarinets. But your big brands, like Selmer, Bakun, Yamaha, Buffet, and now, Royal that's coming in. Though they're all, I mean, they're going to be CNC computerized, machines. So they're all going to be pretty well made. I mean, but there are different issues with each one, like I would say. So there's not like one brand that I would point to as far as if you're buying like a new instrument to say like, this is perfect out of the box. Like it's just not true. Like, every one of them will have some sort of issue, as far as, maybe a pad leaking or spring tensions just not feeling even is a big one. All of them are like that. And then, but yeah, the biggest thing is just getting it as a clarinet player and setting it up as a clarinet player, knowing how it should feel, because a lot of times, in the manufacturing process, a lot of the people like doing some of the setup are actually not clarinet players. So, they're playing them afterwards, make sure they play, but they're not actually players as they're setting them up to be thinking like, hey, if I do this is going to affect this note, like there's just things like that, being a player is a huge thing for doing, assembling instruments, in the manufacturing or repairing them, as well. It's a big deal. So,
so we're coming up on time. If you don't mind, another question or two, and then I'll get out of your hair here.
Of course.
What's the hardest lesson overall that you think you've learned up to this point in your career? We've obviously achieved quite a bit. You've learned quite a lot. Yeah. What's the hardest lesson?
Probably the humility part. I think that is huge. What I kind of come back to that from earlier is just trying to be humble, like in everything that I do, as far as like, trying to approach things like from a teachable standpoint, and like being willing to learn, like, hey, like maybe this method that I'm using with this, like, hey, maybe there is a little bit better way to do it. For one, it helps me, but then it helps, the client too, as far as how long it could take me to do something. And then I think the biggest thing too, it's kind of the same vein, is just not lying to myself as far as like when I'm doing the work. Cause you can squeeze things and, using like a feeler gauge to check pads. Like I can lie to myself and squeeze harder or make a spring tension heavier and like, oh, it's good. It's, send it out the door. But for one, like I just learned, like I know how an instrument should feel. And so I've just learned, honestly, from failing a lot of times too, like even at the beginning of trying to, take it to Jason, who trained me, and then him like showing me like, hey, this is, wrong, like this needs to be done, or this needs to be corrected, or this tension's too heavy, or, different things like that. So, really like that's probably like the hardest thing, I guess, was just kind of, sucking up your pride a little bit and like just being more humble as far as like how you're approaching, even my interactions with others. Like, like sometimes people will come in the shop and I can tell like they're really like stressed out or, whatever it may be, like over their instrument. And I think just having that presence of like humility and then just like willingness to like engage and talk to them is helpful, even just in a business perspective, and just kind of helping kind of calm, like, hey, it's okay. Like, we're going to get this fixed, so that's another big thing. Cause I mean, obviously, where you're talking about somebody's career, like when they're coming in and like, this is their livelihood, like this is like I always say, like the clarinet is just a tool, like that's for your voice, and so that's what you're messing with if it's not correct. So there is some pressure, but I think, on as a repair person to get that right. But I think really the way you get it right is being humble and realizing, like, hey, like I can learn and become better at what I'm doing so that I can, help others more. I think that's a big part of it. So
That's great. When you're not in the shop, what do you like? What else do you like to do?
Oh man. So I'm actually I'm in seminary right now. So I'm actually been studying Greek lately. So I've been studying the Greek language, Koine Greek. So I actually really enjoy doing that. I'm out of those classes now, but I've been continuing doing that now with a tutor. He's actually my UPS guy. I think that was who was honking earlier. He probably thought I was, he was wanting to come get a package. But no, so he's my tutor as well for Greek. So I do that. And then my other thing, I really like coffee. So I love coffee. I roast it. I'm an amateur coffee. I'm talking about being humble. I'm an amateur coffee roaster, but it's drinkable at least. But I love, drinking coffee, trying different brew methods and then different roasting methods, all that. But that's really it. I mean, I used to do more like video games and that type of stuff. If you're in my shop, you can't see it now, but like I have a whole bunch of Zelda posters.
Nice.
Legend of Zelda. Like I love Legend of Zelda, but they only make one like every 10 years. So I don't play video games all that often.
But man, when they make them, they really make them, I guess.
Oh yeah. I used to be more into them, and then I just for one, I think just time. Like once I started seminary, just trying to balance family, work, and life. Like it was just I didn't have time to play video games as much.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean,
really, coffee is a big hobby, I guess now.
Nice. Maybe in the future we'll see a side brand coming out. You can get a little single serve pouch along with your repair work one day.
I've thought about it. I really have thought, but I don't know. Like I'm still trying to get something that's not that it's not drinkable, but I'm still trying to learn in different methods, and then that's been my too. I've moved from using a popcorn maker. You can roast coffee with one of those, and I've moved into actually a regular roaster now. But even just trying to learn the differences, because it's just a different way to do it. So I probably, if I was going to do that, I'd actually need to buy a legit roaster and then actually learn how to actually operate it.
Yeah, I mean
that has actually been something I've thought about doing. So
yeah, well, good luck with that. I mean that's its own world there. I can't even fathom the different countries that the beans come from, all the different methods of even to brew the coffee. It's just a whole thing. So good luck. And whenever you do release something like that, I'd be excited to try it.
Sure, absolutely.
Is there anything that I didn't ask you yet that I should have?
No.
I know we covered quite a bit today.
I think so.
Now, what is there anything in particular you want to plug? Anything big that you're working on right now? I know I found you on kind of Facebook and then in the internet somewhere.
Yeah.
But where would you like people to find you if they're interested in working with you?
Yeah, I mean, really easy. Betterclarinets.com. That'll find my website. But yeah, I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter and Instagram and the others, but I'm not very active. On mainly Facebook. You'll see a lot of posts as far as an instrument that I finished. With my being a small business, my clarinets, when I fix them and refurbish them, a lot of times they'll sell before I can even put them on my website. So it may look like I don't have a lot of inventory. If you look at my in stock, listing on my site, because you can buy from my website. Mm-hmm. But yeah, a lot of times right now it looks like I'm out of stock of everything, but I have probably 4 R13s in the work that just. Some of them are sold, and then some of them will be available, once they're done. And so, yeah, so they can check that out. And then, I guess the only other plug, like I have, my custom clarinet barrels and bells.
Okay.
So, the barrels are made of Grenadilla, and then the Dell are in synthetic material. So you can, 2 options there. And reverse taper, in the bore, and then they're actually kind of look like a reverse taper on the outside too. For different reasons. You can kind of see it on my website too. But yeah, so I do those, and then I'm a rural instrument dealer. I sell those new, and then have refurbished, usually just refurbished buffet, clarinets, R13s and above. But yeah, in general, I mean, that's like my main focus, is just doing good repair for people, and then offering, refurbished clarinets for people. So
Awesome.
but yeah, betterclarinets.com.
Cool. Feel free to message me anything else you want me to put in the show notes. I'll put links to everything that I get from you up there. We're on YouTube, and then Anchor, which distributes us to Spotify and Google Podcasts, all that. Okay. So and I'll send you the links back for however you want to share them around. But thank you again for your time. It's been fascinating and a lot of fun. I hope to see you in real life at some point when we're all rubbing elbows again in public events. And maybe we'll have you back sometime and dig into something else a little deeper.
Yeah.
But
Sounds good.
Thank you again.
Thanks for having me.